Some say the trouble's in the Pentagon. Some say the trouble's in the street. Some say the president's a paragon. Where's the trouble at the bottom? Some say the trouble's the anatomy. Some say the trouble's in the head.
Welcome to Human Rights Here Now, a program dedicated to different perspectives on human rights. Today, we're showing Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, who just celebrated its 100th anniversary. I'm here with Patricia Schroeder and Joy Hinz. Welcome.
Yeah, great to be here.
And we are going to discuss our travel to The Hague, the Netherlands, for the 100th anniversary. And we did this with Jane Doyle, another person from Santa Cruz, and we all, had a great experience. Now, we said it was the 100th anniversary of a Congress and a conference. And we met over 1,000 women. And some of the women were like you, Patricia, very experienced, very knowledgeable. But we also saw people who, just like this person that we're going to watch in a moment, Willow from the Netherlands, who just joined like 3 days before the Congress.
Amazing.
She was amazing. And so she told me that she was really desperate for an organization that could help her take action, because she feels that the world is in a very bad state. So why don't we take a look at Willow and how her experience at the Congress and conference is.
I felt being home. I felt like coming home.
Good. That's
yes.
Wonderful.
It was lovely to see that there were young women from the age of my daughter.
Yes, there were so many young
yes,
women.
And also women from the age of my mother.
Yes.
Yeah, my mother is 90 and the oldest member was 93. I think the base of everything is peace. Yeah. You need peace to talk about the rest. Right. I understand that sometimes violence seems to be the only solution. But if you see what we have done after 9/11 and what we have reached, nothing. The woman who comes from Iran was telling, you have to, instead of throwing bombs, you have to throw books. Yes. And to remember every victim of 9/11, you must not kill people but build schools. Yes. I think she's so very right. I learned a lot, and I went back and my colleagues said, you are smiling so much. I saw so many women, so many strong women with the same message than I have.
And ready to work for a common cause.
Yes, that's true. And think out of the box.
So Patricia and Joy, is this a typical experience from people at the conference? Did you experience it that way?
No, it's very exciting to see, 1,000 women from all over the world together and really excited about being able to do something. And for me, the timing was incredible too, because it was the 70th anniversary of the end of World War II. So it really brought a lot together.
I think the word that I always hear the most from women who are from the Democratic Republic of the Congo or Nigeria, are sections in Africa, they said, it is so uplifting to be here, so uplifting. And they brought so much vitality and energy that I can relate to Willow in that I got energy and I felt very renewed. She felt very turned on, and I just felt very renewed, like this is where I needed to be in order to get my energy going and be uplifted.
Right. Well, I want to go back to where probably it all started, not even 1915, 100 years ago, but even before that. I want to go to Bertha von Suttner. And I know we all learned quite a bit about her, because it wasn't so much in our psyche about her. But so she was a Czech Austrian woman who actually had experienced war because she wrote for European newspapers about the bloody wars, the really bloody wars in Eastern Europe. And so she wrote in 1889, she wrote a book called Die Waffen nieder, which basically says, down with those weapons. I mean, really strong in German. In English, it says, lay down your arms, lay down your weapons. That's the title of the book, and people may want to read it. It's a novel, and it shares the experience of different people during the war. So that book really inspired, sparkled the peace movement in Europe at that time. And she became pretty famous with her speeches. She actually worked for Alfred Nobel for a little less than a year as his secretary. And so people say that she actually influenced him greatly in putting in his will money for the Nobel Peace Prize. Yeah. And she actually received the Nobel Peace Prize herself in 1905. But after her book, about 10 years later, in 1899, the peace movement was strong enough, and actually it had a lot of people also in governments and royalty upset about all the bloody wars. So it was Tsar Nicholas II from Russia who asked the Queen, his cousin, the Queen of the Netherlands, Wilhelmina at that time, to organize a peace conference in The Hague, where she lived. And so dignitaries from different countries came. Bertha von Suttner was not invited to speak at that conference. However, she got a hotel near the conference, and a lot of the participants in the conference actually had conferences with her in her hotel. So she was behind the scenes working on things. Now, she was very pleased that they created the arbitration court, which actually still is in existence, where countries before a conflict breaks out came in front of the court, and then the court helped to resolve the problem, hopefully. And they also created the idea of a peace palace. And so Bertha was, in 1911, she was in the advisory council of the Carnegie Peace Foundation that actually was funding the Peace Palace. It still took 2 years, August 28th of 1913 when the Peace Palace was opened, and she was there. But we all know, of course, that in 1914 the war broke out, and women all around the world were really, really upset. And so maybe, Patricia, you want to say a little bit more about that 1915 year, that all-important year.
I also want to go just back a little bit because, it's like things just don't pop up.
That's right.
There's a movement and there's a lot going on. So the key thing that I found exciting was women who organized this Congress and started Women's International League for Peace and Freedom were two things: suffragettes working hard for women's rights. Only 4 countries in the world had the right for women to vote in 1915. And of course, the United States and every other country wasn't in that. And when the war started, they were already meeting internationally as suffragettes. So I was thinking the networking is already being developed. So they changed gears and they said, wow, this atrocity has to be stopped. And their desire to still work, of course, for their right to vote, because it took a long time for women to be considered even human in the world. They wanted to work for sustainable peace and ways to negotiate. So they did it. And the thing I like best is just to read some words from a woman who was there, because we have our own little diaries. She says, this is from Emily Green Balch, and she's a delegate from the United States. She says, the women, 15,000 of them and more, have come together and for 4 days conferred not on remote and abstract questions, but the vital subject of international relations. English, Scottish, Germans, Austrian, Hungarian, Italian, Polish, Belgian, Dutch, American, Danish, Norwegian, Swedish women, all were here. On the first evening, Dr. Alita Jacobs expressed her appreciation of courage shown by all those women who had braved all the dangers and difficulties of traveling in wartime. And the difficulties and the dangers were real. For instance, the 47 women who came from the United States were taking this ship and there were already ships being blown up because the war had begun. And of course, one of those 47 women that was on the ship was our own Jane Addams. And one thing about Jane Addams, she was very involved in international suffragette and also on reforms, social reforms, and started the Hull House. She was a household name in the United States. Mm-hmm. And they really wanted her, all the women in Europe wanted her to come because they knew about her abilities for leadership, but they also needed to have someone with leadership capacity who was from a neutral country. Mm. And the United States was not yet in the war. Yep. So as us and WILPF know, Jane did that, and she also was very, very key in whenever we go to something, we have to do things when we come home and meet with people and share with leaders, our representatives. Mm-hmm. And of course, she was already known by all governmental officials in the United States. So she went, of course, to see President Woodrow Wilson. And she went over their documents, and so that they were developed in The Hague. So 9 of them were adopted as part of the treaty, the Versailles Treaty, and out of his 14 points. He would have been better to take all the points.
So you mean at the end of the war,
at the end
peace
of the
treaty.
War, he used them.
Right.
But he didn't use them all. And if he had, we may not have had the next war.
Yeah. In fact, I know that she was many of the women were very upset because the sanctions that were put onto Germany, they didn't want that.
That's right.
They knew that was going to be a problem.
Right.
So, and sure enough.
Yep. So Wilson should have listened.
Yep.
Well, you know, the interesting thing to me is the whole conference, or the Congress actually, the first Congress. I read in the documentation that they didn't call it a peace conference. They called it a women's congress to protest war. I mean, it was that strong. And you know, the proposal of the 1915 Congress that you're talking about is that they wanted neutral countries convene a conference and establish a permanent mediation in order to bring the war to an end. And that's why Jane Addams, you know, and other people, they traveled, and you know, in that time, traveling was, you know, especially during the war,
more
very
dangerous.
difficult, more dangerous. And so, but they sent envoys to countries at war and to neutral countries. So I'm just really amazed about the strength of these women.
Well, and speaking of the strength, there was also a massive irony going on, which was this conference was happening in April of 1915. And on the very days that this conference was happening, there was a huge battle happening less than 100 miles away in a part of Belgium called Ypres. And in that battle, more than 120,000 people were either killed or wounded. Right at the same time this conference was happening. And when I was doing some of my research about that later, I also found out that, number one, they used poison gas during that battle. So that's why so many people died. But there were 4 more battles on that exact site during the war, during World War I, and more than 1 million people were killed or maimed at that site, only 100 miles away.
Well, you know, maybe we could show right now the quote from Jane Addams, who, you know, we're talking about strong women, but, you know, she clearly stated, nothing could be worse than the fear that one had to give up too soon and left one unexpended effort that might have saved the world. I mean, that was the whole gist of what we were doing. We got to do it because we may lose everything. So, I mean, it's truly amazing. But the Women's International League for Peace was established. Its first name was a little different, but then it got this name. And the Peace Palace was there. And then skip 100 years, 2015, maybe we can see the Peace Palace in 2015 on the thing. And we're going to watch a couple of photos. And so we're going to take a look. This is actually the old building on the right and the new building with a little pathway. That's where we were having the Congress. And this is, can you say something about that, Joy?
This is actually a tree that's in front of the Peace Palace, and it's a living tree where people come and put their prayers for peace. It's kind of an Eastern tradition, Eastern culture tradition. So
next.
And this is the peace flame. The flame itself came from 7 countries and was brought here, and now there's hundreds of countries represented.
Who's this?
That's Sunina Nazar, and she is our newly elected one of the 4 vice presidents we have, and she's from Pakistan. And Pakistan just became a section in 2012, and they are doing amazing work. And there's Annie on the right, who is the president of the Democratic Republic of Congo WILPF section. And again, they're all busy. Manuel Mesa, who is from the Spanish section. And who's that?
That's our former now president, Madeline Reese.
Our Secretary General.
Secretary General, yes.
She did a marvelous job.
She was
running
great.
And
her closing speech was awesome.
And who's this?
Well, this is another member of the Democratic Republic with the fabric that all their beautiful clothing. There it is. They designed this. Annie in particular did it from a dream and got it fabricated, fundraised, brought it, gave pieces of this cloth to every section. Oh, and that's one of the young women from the DRC, who is Gloria.
They were so lively.
Yeah.
These women were, and you know, I got away with their experience. You know, theirs in Colombia, some of the worst experience they are having in their countries with rape, sexual abuse, and these women were so lively, intelligent, lively. It was really amazing. And here we have Cynthia Enloe.
Oh, Cynthia Enloe. I mean, her picture says it all. She's written so many incredible books on gender and war. Amazing. And this is, I can't remember her name, but she's fabulous. She's
from Finland, right?
From Finland, and she constantly always keeps everyone on speed, on details, on finances, how things fit together. Brilliant.
She got things moving.
Always.
So this was actually where we met, which there were 2 parts. First, there was the Congress.
At the Peace Palace.
At the Peace Palace. Now we're moving to the World Forum, which is just not too far from the Peace Palace. And
where the
this
conference
was the building where all 1,000 of us met.
And here we have...
Now here we have DRC and Colombia.
They had a lot in common.
A lot in common. And also knew that they had experienced so much fear that they could no longer actually experience fear. That they just had to do what was necessary and do it and stay close to each other.
So this is a quilt that was put together. They call it the drone quilt, but actually there's lots of other weapons that are shown here. And it was to represent, you know, the difficulties, the impacts of war. So it was very helpful to see that. And that was actually displayed at what they call the marketplace. So these were different countries that brought various goods, various issues that we could go and walk around and see during the conference.
This is special.
Okay, this is Lema Jiboe from
Nigeria.
no, she's
Liberia.
Liberia.
Right?
Liberia, sorry, yeah.
That's right.
And isn't she talking to one of the Nepalese women?
I think so.
This is, yeah, because the earthquake had happened while
During
the
the Congress
was going on, and our women from Nepal, of course, were devastated and wishing they were home, and everybody connect with them. We raise funds.
Like you see here, and
Oh, is this the pitch for some funding?
this is the pitch for some funding.
Yeah,
Yes.
she was actually asking, she had a hard time getting through this talk. She was really trying not to cry. But she asked for help, for support for the people in Nepal during this time.
Good. And so this was just a little bit to show people what kind of people were there. I fully enjoyed them. But we actually came to do a lot of work. We also had a lot of fun, and we'll go into that a little bit later. But we came to do work, and one way that WILPF lays out its work is by resolutions that are brought to the Congress and then are implemented later on. And so we're going to watch Nancy Price from Davis talk about 3 resolutions. There were like 19 resolutions that were presented. About 11 or 12 were in the end accepted. But she put forth 3 resolutions, and we're going to listen to her talk about the resolutions, and then we take step by step and talk about it.
Our 3 resolutions were, 1, on the secret free trade agreements, that is the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TTIP, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, and then we added TISA, the Trade in Services Agreement. So those are the 3 trade agreements being negotiated in secret. Our second one was the human right to health and safe food. And then we wrote a emergency resolution to be submitted from the floor of the Congress on climate change, environmental justice, and peace. And on the last day of Congress, all 3 were passed unanimously. If you go back to the United Nations Charter and you read the preamble, it starts off saying, "We, the people of the United Nations." So in fact, what's really important about these resolutions is that they are an opportunity for WILPF that has status at the United Nations to use these resolutions as expressions of the will of the people of the countries of the sections of WILPF. We, the peoples of the United Nations, determine to save succeeding generations from the source of war, reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, to establish the conditions under which justice and respect for the obligations arising from treaties and other sources of international law can be maintained. So this really points up the link of present and future, which is the crux of how we and why we are working now to protect the environment and human rights for succeeding generations.
Well, welcome back, and I'll turn off the sound so that we can talk a little bit about what she just said. You know, that there's 2 important things that I hear here is that WILPF has a status in the UN. And so in that sense, our resolutions will resonate with what the work is going on in the UN. And the other thing that she's talking about in the second part of the preamble is about human rights. And you know, you find when you look through the history of WILPF, the WILPF, which is the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, but we say WILPF, that the human rights issue sometimes is the most important issue, and sometimes the women's and the children's issue, and it's very interesting. But Nancy again says, this is again the time that we can make, you know, we need to frame our work in the general, broader framework of human rights. That is at this point one of the most important things. And that really struck with me that she said that. So that's why you want to say something about Peace is Loud, right?
One of the things, you got to get the excitement of all the heaviness. You got to break through it. And one of them is you have to have campaigns that take all the work we've done to impact the UN, the Security Council, to actually have resolutions that consider women and our human rights, like with the Convention to Eliminate All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, and also the what is it again? 13, I always mess it up.
1325.
Yeah, we'll talk about it in a little bit.
But everything is about seeing us, women, as agents of peace and security. Now you got young women bring together all their know-how. So they started, the young WILPFers started the Peace is Loud campaign. It actually came from Abigail Disney as the funder of it. And one of the cool things about that is they have films that you can get free off the web, and you can have discussions with them. I watched 2 of them this morning. Extremely motivating, very current. One was called Women, War and Peace, and then the other one, which was very hard to watch, was The Trials of the Spring, about the Egyptian uprising.
Yeah,
So
we'll show the website of Peace is Loud on the screen.
so it's all about see peace, speak peace, and make peace.
Yes, great. So why don't we go over to the second part with Nancy, where she takes the first resolution, which is the trade agreement. So why don't we watch that video at this point?
Let's just start first with the secret trade agreements, because we're in the midst in the U.S. of fighting the Trans-Pacific Partnership Free Trade Agreement. One of the great successes has been at the grassroots having TPP free zone resolutions passed in some major cities: San Francisco, Seattle, New York City, Pittsburgh, Bellingham, Washington, and others that can be found at the website www.tppfreezones.org. But it might be that we could push the concept of TPP free zones out to Pacific Rim countries that are members of international WILPF, and also TTIP free zones out to the European Union countries. And it would be very important because, in fact, in 1998, when the multilateral agreement on investment was being pushed forward, it was MAI free zones that were voted on in Canada, the US, and Europe that finally broke the back of the MAI, the movement in support of the MAI. France pulled out of it and the MAI collapsed. So I think we really need to work together to push this forward. I think there's great potential.
So this is a really exciting idea that WILPF could be a part of this. For anyone who's watching who doesn't really understand this TPP thing, it's actually an agreement, not a treaty, between the Pacific Rim nations and the Americas. And it's being negotiated in secret for years, mostly with multinational corporations, not with our US Congress, not with the governments, but between the corporations. And the talks, by the way, right now are stalled because some of the countries that are having things set up for them by these corporations have said, wait a minute, this is not good for our country. And they're not happy about it. So they're kind of backing off. So I'm kind of excited that maybe we could have history repeat itself, like with the MIA in 1998, and maybe this agreement will fail. Right. And so we're hoping for that.
And you brought us a picture from Germany where you saw the anti-TPP,
TTIP, yes,
yeah.
There
so let's see that photo.
In the Marienplatz in Munich, Germany, there was an all-day-long protest, which was about human rights primarily, by the way. And I happened to notice this sign there, which was about stopping the TTIP, and there were people talking about that as well.
Right, good. Well, let's go back to Nancy and watch the segment about climate, the climate resolution.
Resolution on climate also has a lot of potential, partly because, number one, it calls for advocating at the UN for a specialist in climate who will report on climate issues in countries. It also advocates that WILPF and women have a voice at COP21 in Paris, November 30 to December 12th, which is the final Conference of Parties meeting of the United Nations climate negotiations, when all countries are to agree on a final reductions of CO2 emissions, and also on a mitigation and adaptation fund. So it's very important that women have a voice at COP21.
So I had an email exchange with Nancy because I was curious to see if WILPF was going to have a presence in Paris. And she said, yes, different countries are sending people. From the US, we don't have an official seat at the table because of certain circumstances, but she's going to go with the group called the Global Climate Convergence Group, and several of them will go to Paris. Of course, the French women, the French WILPF, is going to have demonstrations because in the past, not too much has come out of these conferences, the COP21 conferences, and people really want to be there. Belgian peace groups are going to send, organizing to send 10,000 people by train to Paris.
Wow.
And so that is important. So there will be a presence of WILPF, but not in an official capacity. So that brings us then to the final resolution that she has put together, which is the health and safe food. And why don't we take a look at that?
Thirdly is the human right to health and safe food. There, I think we have a great opportunity to work with other sections to build an inventory of the issues of the human right to health and safe food in their country, and particularly how women agriculturalists and peasant farmers are being impacted by the corporate agricultural industrial complex, what the impacts are on local health because of the heavy use of insecticides and pesticides, and particularly on farm workers, and to work with these communities in a collaborative way so that we can bring forward what's happening to them into our work in the Corporations versus Democracy and subcommittee of Earth Democracy, which is the human right to health.
So we just watched several sections about 3 resolutions. And I know some of the other resolutions had to do with Yemen, with the Ukraine, and other environmental issues. But to the core of the WILPF work is to look at the root causes of war. And maybe we can see the slide about the root causes of war, which is in our manifesto. And we identify among these militarism as a way of thought and the militarization of societies, so that we, for instance, with the Bearcat in Santa Cruz, it's militarization of our society. The second root cause is the capitalistic economic system, which involves the exploitation of labor and resources of the many by the few, and wantonly harming people and the environment. The next one is the nation-state system as it is today, which involves dominant states, imperialist projects, interstate rivalry, occupation of other people, etc. And we also, we have recently, of course, experienced that quite a bit all over the world, social systems of racist supremacy, cultural domination, and religious hierarchy. So those are identified as some of the root causes of war. Did you want to say anything else about that?
Well, I would just like to put out some food for thought, which
Good.
is we call these things that kill people arms. Why? do we call them arms? They are weapons. Let's change our words to represent what really is happening, because, and another one, we call the things that happen collateral damage, which are really civilian deaths. And I would like to encourage us and WILPFers and everybody out there to start calling things what they are, because by doing so, we make it more clear what's really happening instead of making it sound okay.
I think for me, when we get to back to the old game of domination and subordination, it always comes right on home to back 100 years ago with WILPF in The Hague, and all the suffragettes who were really just trying to get to vote. And I think women's experience on being dominated and subjugated shows up in all our work, and the fact that we actually reach out to many root causes, root tips, and always been looking out for children. We're very instrumental in starting UNICEF.
UNESCO.
And UNESCO, and actually in even molding the United Nations from a woman's perspective.
Right. Yeah. Well, we also had, of course, some fun moments, and you know, the arts played a major role in, and we're going to show you one thing. There was a lunch activity at the World Forum about moving the money from the military. So why don't we watch the movie about military and the money?
Today we're going to move the money, the poker chip money, into health, or you can have education, or you can have human rights. So we're all going to take a shovel and move the military money to a world we would rather see. Thank you. You get what you pay for, we won't pay for. Won't pay for driving now, get no more.
We can take
Free education, I've got the law. You get what you pay for, we won't pay for. Won't pay for driving, no killing no more. We'll pay to help those who need something more. Free education, I've got the law.
That was one of the high points of the conference. And everybody was smiling because, and if we just had the power to do that, just imagine
Take
what
the
a
money.
different world we would have immediately.
if it was that simple.
Yeah.
Well, it was a great release for all of us, I think, because we heard so many bad things.
Yeah.
And so, you want to show that quicker strip about how much money is being spent on the military?
I'm gonna hold this here. Just hold it up.
Just hold it up. It looks like 57% is spent on military, and What is on your side?
1% on food and agriculture, 2% on transportation,
So you get
labor,
the picture.
science.
Get the picture. We actually have two pie charts. Maybe you can show those. Here it is. And the next one is for people's review.
Move the money, everyone.
Move the money from the military.
As a planet, we are currently spending $1.7 trillion per year on military, which is just crazy.
So we want to flip from military security to human security.
What a
And
concept.
so we have this picture of, what's her name?
Her name is Bina. Is her picture there?
So her picture's coming.
Okay, so Bina Nepron, she won the Hero Award for CNN. She does a group called Control Arms Foundation, and she works directly with the women, the poorest of the poor women, the women on the fringes, the Manipur Women for Survivors Network.
In India, right?
In India. And she did an informal survey. Hundreds of women did this. And they found out that these little village women were asked questions about what made them feel, did they feel secure if they had a gun in their house, with guns. And they wouldn't even answer their questions because at first they were afraid because they said it's very dangerous when a man in your house has a gun.
That's right.
And she says maybe even more dangerous than outside the house.
Yeah, 42 times more dangerous here in the United States.
Now, there's also a group called Reaching Critical Will, because in order to really get rid of, that's one of our goals, is to total disarmament. And in order to do that, we have to reach critical will. People have to want to do it. And we have a website for the Reaching Critical Will, which they can show on there. But Joy, can you tell a little bit more about the impact of the military? This was fun, but the Indian woman did some. But what else did you find out about the impact of the military?
Well, when we think about militarism and war, we often just think of the war itself, the military itself. Right. But in reality, the impact is massive. So it starts way back with the mining that is done in order to create the weapons, not the arms, that we use for those wars. And by the way, did you know the military is exempt from all environmental regulations in this country, and I think in a lot of other countries too.
Really?
That's unbelievable. So it starts with the toxics that get mined and get run down the rivers. They're using depleted uranium, so we've already mined that uranium, then we're using it in the weapons and leaving it in the countries. Air pollution, water pollution, ground pollution, it destroys ecosystems, and both the war itself and the preparation for the war. Health and sanitation is ruined, infrastructure is destroyed, and of course, it poisons and kills civilians, lots and lots and lots of civilians.
Right. Now, you went to a workshop, and we have two pictures of that with Margaretha and the workshop itself. So why don't we show those while we talk a little bit more. And Margaretha actually talks a lot about land degradation, too. It's just the erosion, the environmental pollution, and you can't really see too much what she's talking about. But it was very intense.
It was a powerful workshop, and we did this prioritization process where he said, what's most important to stop and to do, both to stop and to do. And hopefully something will come of that, where that will be passed along and more work will come.
Right. Now, the next part I want us to talk about is that Resolution 1325, and we have it on we'll have it on the screen. It's a UN resolution from the Security Council, and that clearly states the important role of women in the prevention. Can we see that slide? The important role of women in the prevention and resolution of armed conflicts, in peace negotiations and reconstruction, and emphasizes the necessity to protect women against war violence. And that is one thing, the war violence, that really hit me the hardest. From the women from Colombia, from the the woman from Uganda who was a woman, she was a girl, and who was taken captive. She told her story because somehow an international organization was able to buy her freedom, who was imprisoned, had 4 kids, and had to leave her kids behind, was able to bring some kids from other women, and just the horrors that she told us about what she and the other, and despite all the horrors, the only thing I saw in her was the will to live and the will to fight, get her kids back and get all the other women out of there. It was just really, truly amazing. So, but it hits me really, really hard. The UN resolution emphasizes the active role in the faces of conflict, not just being the victim, but really the active role women can play in the prevention, before the war starts, during the armed conflict to try to, bring some peace, and then once the conflict is over in the peace negotiations. They can be informal negotiators in the UN Resolution 1325. And then, of course, the most important part is the reconstruction and maintaining the peace. And so this all started in about 1995 in Beijing, and because women and armed conflicts were the subject. And it was on October 31st, 2000, that this resolution, which is called the Women, Peace and Security, became a binding international law. Now, over the years, they have added supplements because they needed to strengthen it, and there's different countries that are really working hard on the
WPS. That's what they call it.
What's the WPS? Oh, the WPS, the
Women Peace Security with
Security.
1325.
Right.
Well, most of them are our newest sections, by the way. Once you look at all our 21st century sections in WILPF,
Yeah.
those are sections that are actually making 1325
Come alive.
Yeah, they're working it because it had so many setbacks. It wouldn't have been there without the International Women's Movement, the Decade for Women, but it's there. And if you look at Peace is Loud, there's a petition which relates right here to the United States for us to get some women at the peace table for negotiating for things that are going on right now.
Okay.
But Peace is Loud, and I think this is one of the most well-used resolutions right now by women around the world, and it's a struggle. It's a struggle.
It is, because what I found in reading this, that they had to add new resolutions. Resolution 1820 that included sanctions, because having the resolution, make it in binding international law, one thing, but how do you get the perpetrators?
How do you enforce it?
And so there were sanctions on them. They also had a special representative to the Secretary General on sexual violence in conflict, and the women protection advisors. So, I mean, it's really amazing to me. I didn't know anything about it when I went to the conference, that this is actually a very active I can't say project because it isn't a project, an active initiative that is taking place, and there are several countries that are helping other countries. I noticed that I have a couple of these books here. There was this Dutch National Action Plan. They have had 2 already of those, and they're actually working with women from Afghanistan, Burundi, Colombia, the DRC, Sudan, and South Sudan. And but then also I know the Swedish WILPF is very active in this. And then I have to come back again to the Colombian women. I mean, what a powerful group of people. They wrote their own implementation of this 1325. They are absolutely amazing. So this lives for them. It is important for them because they are suffering it. They're the women in that country. But I'm really pleased that there is a coming together around the world on this. And I think this might be our most hope that we have at this point is to make changes in this world, to get women at the table. And if you're doing the reconstruction, it isn't so much of rebuilding the government buildings and rebuilding schools, which is important, but also how do you build the roads? Where are the roads leading to and from? Is it where people are living or where businesses are located? Is it safe for them to go from their homes to the hospital and to the grocery store? Or do they, have to still go through dirt roads to get there? So in the whole rebuilding of war-struck areas, it is important where things are built, how they are built. And so it is clear that you need to have different angles and not just the military, as you say, and not just the building of the government buildings. So I was very taken by Resolution 1325, and I think we need to do more education about it.
Yes.
And the possibility. You read the same thing?
Definitely. I mean, it's what's making WILPF grow sections in the world. And the sections that are happening, like in Cameroon just came a section.
Yeah.
This is where it's war-torn, and women there are in a war. So this is like not just an abstract conversation to them. Right. This is a tool in a toolbox. They've got to use everything they have. And so they've been going to one country to another that are war-torn, and this has really been has been given perspective. And the fact that it's from the United Nations Security Council helps the guys in power. To at least read it.
Now, the other group that you asked me to put a website on the screen is Peace Women.
Yes.
You want to say something about them?
There's two programs that we have in our UN at the United Nations in New York. One is the one you mentioned, Reaching Critical Will.
Right.
And it's a great website to go through, and you can go through its portal and it has tons of stuff. The other one, Peace Women, has everything on the women, peace and security, on the 1325.
And all the other resolutions.
And much more, and it takes you into the Peace is Loud campaign and getting the films, and also the Speakers Bureau, because a lot of the women that we met who are on the front lines are on a Speakers Bureau, and there's a way we can have them come to us and share their story to get more people in our area behind this.
And so what's happening at this point is that we are telling people at home about this, but they can go to the website. The other thing I would just want to show is how did we end? Can we see the photo of the end of the conference? I mean, it was truly amazing. This group of people standing there, and I mean, not everybody fit in here, but it was just unbelievable. And I know that you have a lot of connections with people all around the world right now, and you have regular contacts with them. And 1325 is one of the binding actions, I think, that we have right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, so we go back and forth between the local and the global. And so maybe what we should do is talk a little bit about the local WILPF and what we do and when we meet. And then maybe we can show on the screen the international WILPF website, the national WILPF site, and the local WILPF site. But why don't you tell us a little bit about local WILPF?
Well, everything starts where you actually are. And so our local WILPF, which I've been a member since 1979, and they were here before I even became a member, our local WILPF branch. They're called branches, local things. And then I was fortunate enough to be co-chair with you back in the 1980s.
I know.
For either
it's fun.
the Stop the Arms Race campaign or Listen to Women for a Change. And we're always connecting with every other group in town to give momentum. And we'll continue to do that. So people.
And we meet about 10 times a year on the third Tuesday of the month.
That's right.
The location varies lately, and we're having another meeting coming up on September 15th.
Right. The only thing is when people watch this, it may be already past that. But anyway, we have meetings every third Tuesday of the month, and they can go to our website. Now, we're at the end of our program, so Joy, why don't you kind of give your closing thoughts about this experience and your work in general?
Well, the experience was very uplifting and very optimistic and hopeful. And at the same time, after I left the conference, I went through some other parts of Europe, and because of the anniversary, got very much immersed in the whole idea of war. And what I see today is that we have 55,000 people a year still dying from wars and militaries. We have 16,000 nuclear weapons. 10% of the population owns 86% of the assets. We have a lot of work to do. There's a place for WILPF, and there's a place for WILPF to grow. And one of the other things that we can do right now is to support the Iran peace agreement, which is getting a lot of pressure, and the other choice is war. We don't want that. So I would encourage people to join our local WILPF and to support that agreement and to help reduce the war in the world.
Patricia?
Well, for me, it always comes back to this. If you've been in this a long time, there's always the fact that it is a struggle, it gets intense, but you cannot isolate. So in going to The Hague and having face-to-face, not Facebook, not virtual, with our growing will from all the continents in the world, and seeing women who are in far more immediate danger than myself or us, who give us courage. And that's really what it's about, because we don't know about the outcomes. We don't, optimistically intelligent is WILPF, but it's really our internationalism and keeping connected to women and keeping that peace, open-mindedness going. That's what gives us better health to do this.
Well, and for me, it is going back. We basically make full circle. The women in 1915 said, give us a seat at the table. And we're saying now, give us a seat at the table. And that's my final thing. And I think we're done with time. Thank you so much for listening and watching. And this was Human Rights Here Now, dedicated to Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. So stay seated.
Some say the trouble's in the Pentagon. Some say the trouble's in the street. Some say the president's a paragon. Where's the trouble at the bottom? Some say the trouble's the anatomy. Some say the trouble's in the head. Some say the trouble's the psychology. Where's the trouble at the bottom? Trouble, trouble, where's the trouble? Oh mama, where's the trouble? Got a headache, seeing double. Where's the trouble at the bottom? Trouble, trouble, where's the trouble? Oh mama, where's the trouble? Got a headache, seeing double.